The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. and Rebecca's feet were killing her. She'd been on her feet for nearly 11 hours straight, running between tables at the Riverside Manor, one of the fanciest restaurants in the city. Her black uniform was slightly wrinkled now, and a small stain from earlier when someone's soup had splashed marked her apron, but she couldn't afford to care about that right now. Table 6 needed their desserts, Table 12 wanted more wine, and Table 15 had been trying to get her attention for the past 5 minutes. 26 years old, and this was her life. Rebecca never imagined she'd still be carrying plates and forcing smiles at rude customers at this age. When she was younger, she had different dreams. Big dreams. The kind of dreams that felt so real you could almost touch them. She was supposed to be on stage somewhere, performing in concert halls, maybe even traveling the world. But life had other plans, as it often does. The restaurant was beautiful, she had to admit. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over white tablecloths and expensive silverware. Soft classical music usually played in the background, though tonight it was barely audible over the chatter of well-dressed customers. Most of them were business people, celebrating deals or entertaining clients. They ordered expensive wines without looking at the prices, and left generous tips if you made them feel important enough. But what really caught Rebecca's attention every single night was the grand piano sitting in the corner of the main dining room. It was gorgeous, a black Steinway that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. Most nights it just sat there silent and untouched like a beautiful sculpture. On Friday and Saturday evenings, the restaurant hired a pianist to play background music, but even then, the playing was just that, background noise. Pleasant but forgettable. Rebecca couldn't help but stare at it sometimes, usually when she was supposed to be doing something else. Her manager, Mr. Patterson, had caught her spacing out while looking at the piano more than once. He'd snap his fingers in her face and remind her that she was paid to serve customers, not daydream. She'd apologize and get back to work, but her eyes would always drift back to those keys when she thought no one was looking. The truth was, Rebecca knew that piano intimately, even though she'd never touched it. She knew every key, every note, every possibility it held, because 5 years ago she'd been one of the top students at the Berkshire Conservatory of Music. She'd spent 8 hours a day practicing, perfecting pieces by Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin. Her teacher said she had something special, a way of making the music feel alive, like it was telling a story only she knew how to tell. Her mother used to sit in the back of the practice rooms and listen, pride shining in her eyes. She'd given up so much to pay for Rebecca's education, working 2 jobs to afford the tuition. They had a plan. Rebecca would graduate, win competitions, get into a prestigious music program, and eventually become a concert pianist. It was going to happen. They both believed it with everything they had. Then her mother got sick. It started with fatigue, then came the doctor's appointments, then the diagnosis. Cancer. Advanced stage. The medical bills started piling up faster than Rebecca could count. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. There were experimental treatments to try, specialists to see, medications that cost thousands of dollars a month. Rebecca dropped out of the conservatory in her final year. There wasn't even a question about it. Her mother tried to stop her, cried and begged her not to throw away her future, but Rebecca wouldn't listen. What kind of daughter would she be if she kept playing piano while her mother suffered? She got a job waitressing because the hours were flexible, and the tips were cash she could use immediately. For 2 years, she worked and cared for her mother, watching the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her slowly fade away. And when her mother finally passed, Rebecca was left with a mountain of debt, no degree, and hands that hadn't played seriously in so long she wasn't sure they remembered how. That was 3 years ago. She kept telling herself she'd go back to music someday. She'd save enough money, pay off the debt, and return to her dreams. But someday never seemed to come. The debt never got smaller, it just shifted. Student loans, credit cards, rent, utilities. Every dollar she made went to keeping her head barely above water. The cheapest apartment she could find still took most of her paycheck. She'd sold her own piano 2 years ago just to make rent. Some nights, after her shift ended and the restaurant was empty, Rebecca would stand near the piano and let her fingers hover over the keys without touching them. She'd imagine the feeling of them under her fingertips, the weight of them, the sound they'd make. But she never actually played. It felt wrong somehow, like she'd be intruding on something that wasn't hers anymore. That life was gone. She was a waitress now, and that was just reality. Tonight was particularly busy, which meant good tips but also meant she was exhausted. A large party had taken over the private dining area, some kind of corporate celebration. They'd ordered champagne and expensive steaks, and they were loud in that way rich people get when they're having fun. Rebecca didn't mind, really. Happy customers usually meant better tips, and she desperately needed a good night. She was carrying a tray of drinks to table 8 when she noticed him. An older man, maybe in his early 60s, sitting alone at table 14. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just eating his meal and occasionally looking around the restaurant. But there was something different about the way he watched everything, like he was studying the place rather than just dining there. He was well-dressed, expensive suit, nice watch, the kind of customer who clearly had money. But he didn't have that arrogant air that some wealthy people carried. When Rebecca had taken his order earlier, he'd been polite, even kind. He'd asked her name and actually seemed to listen when she answered. That was rare. What Rebecca didn't notice was how often this man's eyes followed her movements throughout the evening. How he watched her glance at the piano every time she passed it. How her face changed when she looked at it, a mixture of longing and pain that lasted just a second before she put her professional smile back on and returned to work. She didn't notice because she was too busy trying to survive the shift. Table 12 needed their check. Table 6 wanted to change their dessert order for the 3rd time. Someone had spilled wine on table 9, and she had to clean it up quickly before it stained the expensive carpet. The kitchen was backed up, which meant she had to keep apologizing for delays and offering free appetizers to keep people happy. By 10:30, most of the tables had cleared out. Just a few lingered over coffee and after-dinner drinks. Rebecca's section was almost done for the night. Just a few more tables to close out and she could finally go home, peel off these shoes and collapse into bed. The older man at table 14 was still there, though. He'd finished his meal but seemed in no hurry to leave. He'd ordered coffee and was just sitting there, peaceful and quiet, watching the nearly empty restaurant. Rebecca approached his table with the check, ready to finish up. She had no idea that this man, this quiet customer she'd barely paid attention to, was about to change her entire life. She didn't know that in the next few minutes everything she thought was impossible was about to become real. All she knew was that her feet hurt, she was tired, and she wanted to go home. Sometimes life's biggest moments arrive when you're least prepared for them, disguised as ordinary nights that feel like every other night you've survived. Rebecca placed the leather check holder on the edge of table 14 and smiled that professional smile she'd perfected over years of waitressing. The kind that looked genuine but didn't quite reach your eyes when you were this exhausted. Whenever you're ready, sir. No rush. The older man looked up from his coffee and smiled back, but his smile seemed different. It had a warmth to it, something real. Actually, before you go, I have a question for you. Rebecca paused, hoping this wouldn't be complicated. Sometimes customers wanted to chat at the end of the night, and while she tried to be polite, all she wanted right now was to finish up and leave. Of course. What can I help you with? The man gestured toward the piano in the corner. That piano over there. Do you play? The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. Of all the things she expected him to ask, that wasn't it. Her eyes automatically went to the piano, then back to him. I'm sorry, what? The piano, he repeated calmly. I've been watching you all evening. Every time you walk past it, you look at it like it's an old friend you haven't seen in years. So I'm asking, do you know how to play? Rebecca felt her face flush. Had she really been that obvious? She thought she'd been subtle about it. Just quick glances that no one would notice. I used to play. A long time ago. But I'm just a waitress here, sir. The piano is for hired performers on weekends. How long ago? He pressed, his eyes curious but not intrusive. She hesitated. Talking about her past always felt like opening a wound that hadn't quite healed. 5 years since I played seriously. I went to music school for a while, but things changed. Life got complicated. The man nodded slowly, like he understood more than she was saying. What would you play if you could? Right now, if that piano was yours and no one was watching? Rebecca laughed nervously, looking around the restaurant. There were only 3 other tables with customers now, all of them absorbed in their own conversations. Mr. Patterson was in his office doing paperwork. The kitchen staff was cleaning up. I don't know, sir. I haven't really thought about it. That was a lie. She thought about it every single night. I think you have, the man said gently. I think you know exactly what you'd play. Something about his tone made Rebecca's defenses drop just a little. Maybe it was because she was tired. Or maybe it was because this stranger somehow seemed to see something in her that most people missed. Probably Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. It was my mother's favorite piece. Beautiful choice, he said. And the way he said it made it clear he actually knew the piece, wasn't just being polite. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. For a moment, Rebecca thought he was just going to pay his bill and leave. And this strange conversation would become just another weird moment in a long night of work. But instead, he pulled out a business card and handed it to her. My name is Richard Chen. I own Chen Technologies. Maybe you've heard of it. Rebecca took the card, staring at the name printed in elegant letters. Chen Technologies. She had heard of it. Everyone had. It was one of the biggest tech companies in the country, worth billions. Her hand started to tremble slightly as the reality of who she'd been serving dinner to began to sink in. I also sit on the board of several arts organizations, Richard continued. The Metropolitan Arts Foundation, the National Music Conservancy, and I'm a major donor to the Riverside Symphony Orchestra. I've spent a lot of money over the years listening to talented musicians. And you know what I've learned? Rebecca shook her head, unable to find her voice. The most talented ones aren't always on stage. Sometimes they're in places like this, hiding in plain sight, carrying their dreams around like secret treasures no one else can see. He paused, his expression growing more serious. I want you to play that piano. Right now. Play your mother's favorite piece. Sir, I can't. I'm working, and my manager would never allow. Let me worry about your manager, Richard said firmly. He pulled out his phone and pressed a number. Seconds later, Rebecca watched in disbelief as Mr. Patterson practically ran out of his office, his face flushed and nervous. Mr. Chen, is everything all right? Is there a problem with your meal? Mr. Patterson was wringing his hands, looking more anxious than Rebecca had ever seen him. Everything is perfect, Richard assured him, but I have an unusual request. I'd like Rebecca here to play the piano for a few minutes. Would that be acceptable? Mr. Patterson's eyes went wide. He looked at Rebecca like he was seeing her for the first time, confusion written all over his face. The piano? But she's a waitress. She's never mentioned, is it acceptable? Richard repeated, his voice polite, but with an edge that made it clear this wasn't really a question. Of course, Mr. Patterson stammered. Rebecca, please accommodate our guest. Whatever Mr. Chen wants. Rebecca stood frozen. This couldn't be happening. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The few remaining customers in the restaurant had noticed something unusual was going on, and were starting to pay attention. I haven't played in front of people in years, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. I don't even know if I remember how. Richard stood up from his table and walked closer to her. His voice was quiet, meant just for her. You remember. Your fingers remember. Your heart remembers. I've spent 40 years reading people, finding talent in unexpected places. That's how I built my business, by seeing potential others missed. And I'm telling you right now, you need to play that piano. But why? Rebecca asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why does this matter to you? You don't know me. For a moment, something flickered across Richard's face, a memory or an old pain. 30 years ago, I was a young programmer working night shifts as a security guard to pay my bills. I had ideas, big ideas, but no one would listen to someone like me. Then one night, a CEO came through the building I was guarding. He saw me working on code on my laptop during my break. Instead of telling me to get back to work, he asked me what I was building. That conversation changed my life. He became my first investor, my mentor. He saw something in me when I was invisible to everyone else. Richard's eyes met Rebecca's. He died 5 years ago. At his funeral, I promised myself I'd spend the rest of my life doing for others what he did for me, looking for talent in unexpected places, giving chances to people who deserve them. So when I see a waitress who looks at a piano the way you do, who carries herself like someone who's lost something precious, I pay attention. Rebecca felt tears starting to form. She blinked them back hard. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Good, Richard said. That means it matters. Now go play. The walk to the piano felt like it took forever and no time at all. Rebecca was aware of every eye in the restaurant following her. Mr. Patterson looked confused and worried. The other customers had stopped their conversations entirely, sensing something unusual was happening. The kitchen staff had started peeking through the service window. She sat down on the piano bench and for a moment just stared at the keys. They looked exactly like she remembered. Black and white, simple and perfect. Her hands hovered over them, shaking slightly. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she'd really played. What if she'd lost it? What if whatever gift she'd had was gone, buried under years of exhaustion and grief and just trying to survive? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people, in front of this billionaire who'd somehow decided she was worth believing in? But then she thought about her mother, about those nights in the practice rooms when it was just the two of them and the music, about how her mother used to close her eyes and smile when Rebecca played this particular piece, like the music was taking her somewhere beautiful. Rebecca closed her own eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The first notes came out hesitant, careful. It had been so long, but then something extraordinary happened. Muscle memory kicked in, and suddenly her fingers knew where to go. The music started to flow, and with it came everything she'd been holding back for 5 years. All the grief over her mother's death poured into those keys. All the frustration of dreams deferred, of talent wasted, of potential buried under bills and exhaustion. All the nights she'd stood next to this very piano, too afraid to touch it. Every sacrifice, every loss, every moment of wondering if she'd made the wrong choices. It all came out through Chopin's beautiful, melancholy notes. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing. Rebecca didn't see any of it. Her eyes were closed and she was somewhere else entirely. She was back in the practice room with her mother. She was 21 again when the world still felt full of possibilities. The music swelled and fell, telling a story without words. Around her, people sat transfixed. One woman at table 8 had tears running down her face. A businessman at table 6 had forgotten entirely about the important call he'd been about to make. And Richard Chen stood near the back of the room, his arms crossed, nodding slowly to himself. He'd been right. He'd seen it. The real thing. Raw talent that couldn't be faked or taught, only discovered. As Rebecca's fingers moved across the piano keys, something shifted inside her. It started as a trickle, then became a flood. The music she'd kept locked away for 5 years came pouring out, and with it, everything she'd been trying not to feel. She transitioned from Chopin into something more powerful, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was a bold choice, a piece that demanded everything from the performer. The dark, brooding opening chords filled the restaurant like a thunderstorm rolling in. Her hands moved with a confidence that surprised even her, reaching for the dramatic passages she'd practiced hundreds of times years ago. The piano responded to her touch like they were old friends reuniting after too long apart. Every note rang clear and true. The Steinway's rich tone filled every corner of the room, wrapping around the listeners like something alive. This wasn't background music. This was music that demanded attention, that grabbed you by the heart and wouldn't let go. At table 8, the woman who'd been crying now had her hand over her mouth, completely overwhelmed. She'd come to this restaurant expecting a nice meal before catching a late movie with her husband. Instead, she was witnessing something she'd remember for the rest of her life. Her husband, who normally got impatient during classical music, sat perfectly still, completely absorbed. Near the bar, 2 servers who'd been rolling silverware had stopped working entirely. They stood frozen, silverware forgotten in their hands, staring at their co-worker like they'd never seen her before. Because they hadn't, not really. They'd worked alongside Rebecca for 2 years, sharing shifts and complaining about rude customers and bad tips. They knew she was quiet, kept to herself, always looked a little sad. But they'd had no idea about this. Mr. Patterson had emerged from his office and stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He was doing mental calculations, running through the past 2 years in his mind. How many times had he snapped at Rebecca for being too slow? How many times had he criticized her for daydreaming when he caught her looking at the piano? She'd never mentioned anything about music school, never said a word about being able to play. And now here she was, playing like a professional, maybe better than the pianist he hired on weekends. He felt a strange mixture of emotions. Embarrassment, certainly, maybe a little guilt, but also something like wonder, because even he, who knew nothing about classical music, could tell this was special. The technical skill was obvious, even to untrained ears. Rebecca's hands flew across the keys with precision, hitting every note exactly right. But it was more than that. There was emotion in every phrase, every dynamic shift. The music wasn't just being played, it was being felt, lived, breathed. It told a story about loss and longing, about beauty found in sadness, about the human experience of surviving when you wanted to thrive. Richard Chen watched from his position near the back wall, his trained eye catching details others might miss. The way Rebecca's shoulders moved with the music, how her body swayed slightly during the more romantic passages, the absolute focus on her face like nothing existed except her and the piano. This was someone who'd been trained properly, rigorously. You didn't develop this level of skill from casual lessons. This took years of dedicated practice, thousands of hours of work. He pulled out his phone and started recording, but quietly, discreetly. Not for himself, but because he knew this moment needed to be captured. Something in his gut told him this performance would matter beyond tonight, beyond this restaurant. At table 6, a businessman named Robert Yamamoto was experiencing something unexpected. He'd come to this restaurant to decompress after a brutal day of negotiations. He was tired, stressed, thinking about the contracts he still needed to review tonight. Music was the last thing on his mind. But now, listening to this Waitress play, something in him cracked open. It reminded him of his sister who'd played violin before she died in a car accident 10 years ago. She used to play with this same passion, this same ability to make you feel things you'd been trying not to feel. He hadn't thought about her in months, been too busy with work, with life. Now here he was in a fancy restaurant, crying over his forgotten dessert because a stranger's piano playing had brought his sister back to him for a few minutes. Near the kitchen entrance, a young chef named Diego stood mesmerized. He'd been about to take his break, tired from a long night of cooking. But the music had stopped him in his tracks. Diego had his own secret, a guitar he played alone in his apartment, songs he wrote but never shared with anyone. He understood what this was, what it meant when someone poured their soul into their art. He could see it in Rebecca's posture, in the way she gave everything to every note. The music built toward its climax, the powerful crescendo that made Rachmaninoff's Prelude so famous. Rebecca's hands crashed down on the keys with controlled force, the sound filling the restaurant like a declaration. This wasn't just music anymore. This was someone announcing themselves to the world, saying, I exist, I matter, I have something to give, and then, just as dramatically as it had built up, the music descended into the quiet, mysterious ending. The final notes hung in the air like questions without answers, beautiful and unsettling at the same time. Rebecca's hands lifted from the keys slowly, reluctantly, like she wasn't ready for the connection to end. For several long seconds, there was absolute silence. Not the awkward kind of silence, but the sacred kind. The kind that happens when people have witnessed something genuine and need a moment to process it. The kind of silence that happens in churches and art galleries and moments of profound beauty. Rebecca sat at the piano, her hands still hovering above the keys, her eyes still closed. She was shaking slightly, whether from adrenaline or emotion or both, she couldn't tell. For those few minutes of playing, she'd been transported back to who she used to be, not an exhausted waitress barely making rent, not someone crushed under debt and lost dreams. Just herself, pure and complete, doing the thing she was meant to do. Then the applause started. It began with Richard Chen, who started clapping slowly, deliberately. Then table 8 joined in, then table 6, then everyone. The kitchen staff emerged fully from the back, applauding and wiping their eyes. Mr. Patterson started clapping too, looking somewhat stunned. The 2 servers who'd been rolling silverware were clapping and crying at the same time. The applause grew louder, more enthusiastic. People stood up from their tables. It became the kind of applause you hear at concert halls, the kind that acknowledges something extraordinary has just happened. Several people were wiping tears from their faces, not even entirely sure why they were crying, just knowing they'd been moved by something real. Rebecca finally opened her eyes and turned around on the piano bench. The sight of all these people standing and clapping for her, people who'd been strangers 5 minutes ago, was overwhelming. She'd forgotten this feeling, forgotten what it was like to connect with people through music, forgotten how powerful it could be to share something honest and vulnerable and have it received with appreciation. She stood up on shaky legs, not quite sure what to do with herself. She wasn't dressed for a performance. She was wearing her waitress uniform, practical black pants and a white shirt and apron with a stain on it. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nothing like a concert pianist. But in that moment, that's exactly what she was. Richard Chen approached the piano, still clapping, a huge smile on his face. He looked genuinely delighted, like he'd just discovered something valuable he'd been searching for. That, he said loudly enough for others to hear, was extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. Rebecca didn't know what to say. Thank you felt inadequate. Her voice came out small and uncertain. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get so carried away. I just started playing and— Don't apologize! Richard cut her off firmly. Don't you dare apologize for that. What's your full name? Rebecca Holland, she managed to say, still slightly dazed by everything happening. Rebecca Holland, Richard repeated, like he was committing it to memory. How long did you study music? Where did you train? Berkshire Conservatory. 3.5 years before I had to leave. I was supposed to graduate 5 years ago. Richard nodded, taking this in. Around them, other customers were starting to approach, wanting to say something to Rebecca. The woman from table 8 reached her first, grabbing Rebecca's hands. That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Thank you. Just thank you. Others echoed similar sentiments. The businessman who'd been thinking about his sister simply nodded at Rebecca, with tears still on his face, unable to speak but clearly moved. Diego, the young chef, gave her a thumbs up and mouthed incredible, before heading back to the kitchen. Mr. Patterson stood awkwardly to the side, clearly unsure of his role in this moment. He approached Rebecca with an uncomfortable expression. Rebecca, I had no idea you could play like that. You never asked, Rebecca said simply, not unkindly, just stating a fact. She'd been invisible to him for 2 years, just another server. Why would he have asked? Richard watched this interaction with interest, then stepped in smoothly. Mr. Patterson, would you mind if I spoke with Rebecca privately for a few minutes? Perhaps in one of your quieter sections? Of course, Mr. Patterson agreed quickly. He gestured toward a small private dining area off to the side. Please use room 3. Take all the time you need. Rebecca followed Richard Chen into the private dining room, her mind racing. Nothing about tonight made sense. An hour ago, she'd been worrying about making rent. Now she'd just performed in front of a billionaire in a room full of strangers, and somehow they'd all loved it. Her hands were still trembling from the adrenaline. The private room was elegant but simple, with a small table and comfortable chairs, soft lighting that made everything feel intimate and important. Richard gestured for her to sit, and she did, feeling suddenly very aware of her wrinkled uniform and tired appearance. First things first, Richard said, settling into his own chair. I want to make something clear. What just happened out there wasn't luck or a fluke. That was years of training and natural talent combining into something remarkable. You understand that, right? Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to downplay it, to make it smaller somehow. That was safer. I used to be good. I don't know if I still am. That's the first time I've played in front of anyone in 5 years. You're better than good, Richard said firmly. I've attended hundreds of classical music performances. I've heard pianists who trained at Juilliard, who perform at Carnegie Hall, who've won international competitions. What you just did ranks with the best of them. Actually, it was better than most because it had something many professional performances lack. What's that? Honesty, Richard said simply. You weren't performing to impress anyone. You were playing because you needed to, because those feelings had to go somewhere. That kind of authenticity can't be faked. It's what separates technically proficient musicians from true artists. Rebecca felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. She'd spent so long telling herself her music career was over, that she'd missed her chance. Hearing someone like Richard Chen say these things was breaking down walls she'd built for protection. Why did you stop? Richard asked gently. What happened 5 years ago? So Rebecca told him. About her mother's cancer diagnosis. About dropping out of conservatory in her final year to take care of her and work to pay medical bills. About the 2 years of watching her mother deteriorate despite everything they tried. About the mountain of debt left behind when her mother passed. About how she kept meaning to go back to music, but life kept getting in the way, and eventually it felt too late, like that door had closed forever. Richard listened without interrupting. his expression thoughtful and compassionate. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and started typing something. "I'm sending an email to 3 people right now," he said, still typing. "The Dean of Admissions at Riverside Conservatory, the Director of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, and my personal assistant. Can I have your contact information? Phone number and email?" Rebecca recited them, confused about where this was going. Richard entered them into his phone and finished his email, then put the phone face down on the table and looked at her directly. "Here's what I want to propose," he said, "and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond, because I know your instinct is going to be to say no or to think this is too good to be true. Fair?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. "I want to fund your return to music, full scholarship to finish your degree at any music school that will accept you, which, given what I just witnessed, will be all of them. Monthly living stipend so you can quit this job and focus entirely on your studies and practice. I'll also set up auditions for you with several prominent orchestras and chamber music groups I have connections with." Rebecca's mouth fell open. She started to speak, but Richard held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know what you're thinking. Why would I do this for a stranger? What's the catch? Is this real? So let me explain. 28 years ago, I was a 24-year-old immigrant working as a security guard while trying to build a software company on the side. I had big ideas but no money, no connections, no way forward. Then one night, a man named David Foster came through the building I was guarding. He was a CEO, very successful. Instead of ignoring me, he asked what I was working on. I showed him my code, explained my vision. Most people would have nodded politely and walked away. He didn't. He gave me my first investment, became my mentor, opened doors I didn't even know existed." Richard's voice got quieter, more emotional. "David passed away 5 years ago. At his funeral, I made a promise. I'd spend the rest of my life doing for others what he did for me. Looking for talented people who just need a chance, who have potential, but lack opportunity. I've done it in business, investing in startups run by people others overlooked. But I've always wanted to do it in the arts too, because that's where David's real passion was. He loved music, collected rare violins, sponsored young musicians. So when I see someone like you, working in a restaurant but carrying this incredible gift, it feels like fate put you in front of me." Rebecca's vision was blurring with tears now. "I don't know what to say. This is too much. I can't just accept—" "Yes, you can," Richard interrupted. "And here's why you should. Because you're 26 years old, which means you have 40, 50, maybe 60 years ahead of you. Right now you're exhausted, in debt, working a job that doesn't fulfill you. If nothing changes, where will you be in 5 years? 10 years? Still waitressing, still dreaming about music, still wondering what might have been. Or you can take this chance, finish your training, become the pianist you were meant to be. Not just for you, but for everyone who will hear you play. Because Rebecca, people need what you have. They need music that makes them feel things, that reminds them they're human. You saw what happened out there tonight. He was right. Rebecca had seen it. The woman crying. The businessman thinking about his sister. The young chef who understood. Complete strangers connected to something real and honest through her playing. "But what if I fail?" Rebecca whispered. "What if I go back and I'm not good enough anymore? What if I've lost too much time?" "You won't fail," Richard said with absolute certainty. "Because I don't make investments I don't believe in. I didn't build a multi-billion-dollar company by being wrong about people. And I'm telling you right now, you have something special. Yes, you'll need to practice to shake off the rust. But that foundation is still there. I heard it tonight. Everyone heard it." Rebecca sat there trying to process everything. Part of her was screaming to say yes immediately, to grab this opportunity with both hands. But another part, the part that had learned to expect disappointment, was afraid. What if this wasn't real? What if there were strings attached she didn't understand yet? "What do you get out of this?" she asked. "I'm sorry, but I have to ask. This feels too generous." Richard smiled, not offended by the question. "Fair enough. What I get is the satisfaction of helping someone fulfill their potential. The knowledge that I'm honoring my mentor's memory. And honestly, the joy of being proven right. When you're successful, when you're performing at major venues, I'll get to say I knew it first. That's enough for me. This isn't a loan, Rebecca. You don't owe me anything except your best effort." He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. "My personal number and email are on there. I'm going to have my assistant reach out to you tomorrow with specific details and next steps. But I need to know right now, are you willing to at least consider this, to have that conversation? Rebecca picked up the card, her fingers trembling. Richard Chen, CEO, Chen Technologies, his personal number. This was real. This was actually happening. A few hours ago, her biggest concern was making enough in tips to pay her electric bill. Now a billionaire was offering to change her entire life. She thought about her mother, about all those sacrifices she'd made. About sitting in practice rooms together, her mother's face glowing with pride. About her mother's last words to her. Don't give up on your music. Promise me. Rebecca had promised, even though she didn't see how she could keep that promise. Maybe this was how. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I want to have that conversation. Richard's face broke into a huge smile. Excellent. That's all I needed to hear tonight. Now I have one more request, and this one is important. When my assistant contacts you tomorrow, I want you to seriously consider letting us share the video I took tonight. Post it online, let people see what I saw. Not for fame or attention, but because your story matters. There are probably thousands of talented people out there working jobs that don't fulfill them, thinking their dreams are over. They need to see that it's not too late, that chances can come from unexpected places. Rebecca hadn't even thought about the video, about people beyond that restaurant seeing her performance. The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. I'll think about it, she promised. That's all I ask. Richard stood up and Rebecca did the same. He extended his hand and she shook it, struck by how surreal this moment was. Get some rest tonight, Rebecca. Tomorrow your life starts changing. And one more thing. You should probably give Mr. Patterson your notice. 3 months later, Rebecca stood backstage at Riverside Concert Hall, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. This was different from the nervousness she'd felt that night at the restaurant. This was anticipation, excitement, the feeling you get when you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Tonight was her debut performance with the Riverside Symphony Orchestra. The concert hall was sold out. Over 2,000 seats filled with people waiting to hear her play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was the same piece she'd played portions of that night at the restaurant, but this time it would be the full concerto, backed by a complete orchestra. So much had happened in those 3 months that sometimes Rebecca had to pinch herself to believe it was real. Richard's assistant had called the very next morning, just as promised. Within a week, Rebecca had been accepted back to Riverside Conservatory to complete her final year, with all tuition covered. The monthly stipend Richard provided meant she could focus entirely on music for the first time in years. No more double shifts, no more exhaustion, just practice and study and growth. But the thing that had changed everything was the video. After several long conversations with Richard's team, Rebecca had agreed to let them post the recording of that night's performance. She'd been nervous about it, worried people would judge her waitress uniform or her emotional reaction or any number of things. Those worries had been completely unfounded. The video went viral within 48 hours. Not just popular, but truly viral. The kind of video that gets shared millions of times across every platform. People connected with it in ways Rebecca never anticipated. The comments section filled with thousands of stories from people who'd given up on their own dreams, who'd let circumstances push them away from what they loved. News outlets picked up the story. Rebecca did interviews where she talked about her mother, about the years working at the restaurant, about the night that changed everything. Each interview led to more attention, more opportunities. But through it all, Richard's team helped her stay focused on what mattered, the music itself, not the fame around it. The viral video had started something bigger than just Rebecca's story, though. Richard launched what he called the Hidden Brilliance Initiative, a foundation dedicated to finding and funding talented artists working in service industries. They created an application process where people could submit videos of themselves performing, whether it was playing music, dancing, singing, painting, any artistic pursuit they'd had to put aside for economic reasons. Within the first month, they received over 50,000 applications from around the world. A barista in Seattle who'd been a professional ballet dancer before an injury, a delivery driver in Atlanta who wrote and recorded his own music, a retail worker in London who created incredible sculptures in her tiny apartment, a janitor in Tokyo who was a classically trained opera singer, all of them talented, all of them hidden, all of them still carrying their dreams despite working jobs that had nothing to do with their art. Richard's foundation provided full scholarships, grants and mentorship to 50 artists in that first round, with plans to expand. Each person's story got shared on the foundation's website, creating a growing community of people who refused to give up on themselves. The movement started trending online with hashtags like Hidden Brilliance and Second Chance Artists. But tonight wasn't about all of that. Tonight was about Rebecca finally standing on a stage where she belonged, about to do what she'd trained her entire life to do. She peeked through the curtain at the audience. The concert hall was beautiful, all dark wood and red velvet seats with incredible acoustics that would make every note ring clear. In the front row sat Richard Chen, dressed impeccably as always, looking proud and excited. Next to him were several members of his family, and some colleagues from his foundation scattered throughout the audience, were other people whose lives had intersected with Rebecca's that night. Mr. Patterson was there, her former boss who donated a substantial amount to the Hidden Brilliance initiative in what he called making amends for not seeing what was in front of me. The woman from table 8 was there with her husband, the same couple who'd been the first to cry during her impromptu performance. Diego, the young chef, had gotten the night off specifically to attend and was sitting in the balcony section. But the most meaningful presence was in the seat next to Richard, even though it was technically empty. Rebecca had asked that one seat be left vacant and marked with a photo of her mother. It felt important that her mother be there somehow, present in spirit for the moment she'd always believed would come. The orchestra was already on stage, tuning their instruments, that beautiful chaotic sound that comes before organized music begins. The conductor, a renowned woman named Catherine Liu, appeared backstage and smiled at Rebecca. "Ready, don't be nervous. I heard your rehearsals. You're going to be spectacular." "I'm not nervous," Rebecca said truthfully. "I'm excited," Catherine nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right energy. Remember, play it like you played that night in the restaurant. With honesty, the technique will take care of itself." The stage manager gave the signal. It was time. Rebecca took a deep breath, smoothed down her concert dress, a beautiful deep blue gown that made her feel elegant and professional, and walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was overwhelming. It started as normal applause but grew when people recognized her, when they realized this was the woman from the viral video, the waitress turned pianist. People stood up, clapping harder. It wasn't just appreciation for a performer about to play. It was celebration, acknowledgement of a journey, recognition of someone who'd earned this moment. Rebecca walked to the piano and bowed, moved by the reception. Then she sat down, adjusted the bench slightly, and looked up at Catherine, who stood on the conductor's podium, baton ready. Their eyes met. Catherine gave a small nod and raised her baton. The orchestra began those famous melancholy opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto. Rebecca waded through the orchestra's introduction, her hands poised over the keys. This was one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, demanding both technical brilliance and emotional depth. But Rebecca wasn't thinking about the difficulty. She was thinking about the music, about what story she wanted to tell. When her entrance came, her fingers found the keys like coming home. The piano and orchestra began their conversation, trading melodies, building together. Rebecca poured everything into it. All the years of struggle, all the grief, all the hope, all the gratitude for this second chance she'd been given. The audience disappeared. The concert hall disappeared. There was only the music flowing through her and around her. She and the orchestra breathed together, moved together, creating something larger than any of them individually could make. During the second movement, the beautiful romantic section that's been used in countless films, Rebecca found herself thinking about everyone who'd helped her get here. Richard, who'd seen something in a tired waitress. Her mother, who'd sacrificed everything to give her this training. Mr. Patterson, who'd learned to look closer at the people around him. All the strangers from that night who'd listened and responded with such generosity of spirit. The third movement exploded with energy and joy, the piano part becoming increasingly virtuosic, demanding everything from the performer. Rebecca gave it everything, her fingers flying across the keys, the music building to its triumphant conclusion. The orchestra swelled behind her, supporting her, lifting the music higher and higher. And then, after nearly 35 minutes of intense performance, came the final chord. Rebecca and the orchestra hit it together, perfectly synchronized, and the sound filled the entire hall, triumphant and complete. For a moment, silence. That sacred pause. Then the audience erupted. People leapt to their feet, applauding, cheering, some crying. The orchestra members were tapping their bows on their music stands, their way of applauding a soloist. Catherine turned from her podium and applauded Rebecca too, beaming with pride. Rebecca stood and bowed, overwhelmed by emotion. She gestured to Catherine and the orchestra, sharing the applause with them. When she looked at the front row, she saw Richard on his feet, clapping enthusiastically, tears on his face. He'd been right. He'd seen what was possible when others saw only a waitress. The applause continued for several minutes, calling Rebecca back for multiple bows. Finally, when it began to subside, Catherine approached the front of the stage with a microphone. The audience quieted down, curious. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine said, "I've conducted for 30 years, worked with hundreds of soloists. What we just witnessed was extraordinary, not just for the technical mastery, though that was certainly present, but for the heart behind it." Rebecca Holland's story reminds us that talent doesn't disappear when circumstances change. It waits. And sometimes, if we're lucky, if the right people pay attention, it gets a second chance to shine. She turned to Rebecca. "On behalf of this orchestra and everyone here tonight, thank you for sharing your gift with us. This is only the beginning for you." More applause, more tears, more celebration. As Rebecca left the stage, she passed by the empty seat with her mother's photo. She touched it gently, whispering, "We did it, Mom. We did it." Backstage, after the adrenaline started to fade, Rebecca was surrounded by well-wishers. Other musicians from the orchestra congratulated her. Richard came backstage with his family, giving her a warm hug. "That was everything I knew it would be and more. I'm so proud of you." "I wouldn't be here without you," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, you would," Richard corrected gently. "Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe the path would have been different. But this talent, this dedication, it would have found its way eventually. I just helped accelerate the timeline." Mr. Patterson appeared, looking somewhat uncomfortable but sincere. "Rebecca, that was magnificent. I wanted to apologize again for not seeing, for not asking." "It's okay," Rebecca interrupted him kindly. "You're seeing now. That's what matters. And your support of the foundation is helping so many other people get chances they deserve." Diego, the young chef, waited patiently for his turn. When he finally reached Rebecca, he had tears in his eyes. "I applied to the foundation," he admitted quietly, "for music. I write songs, but I never thought anyone would care. Watching what happened to you made me believe maybe my music matters too." "It does," Rebecca assured him. "All of it matters. Everyone's art matters. Keep creating, keep applying, and even if the foundation doesn't pick you, don't stop. Promise me you won't stop," he promised. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Rebecca found herself alone in her apartment, the apartment she could now actually afford, with space for a piano. The same Steinway from the restaurant, actually. Richard had bought it and gifted it to her, saying, "Instruments should be played by people who understand them." She sat at the piano in her pajamas, exhausted but happy, and played softly. Not Chopin or Rachmaninoff this time, just gentle improvisation. As she played, she thought about how much had changed in 3 months. How a single moment of being seen, really seen, had unlocked everything.